Bad news continues to pile up for the Penn State Nittany Lions in the class of 2023 with the recruiting trail. What promised to be a top 10 class and would promise maybe to be even higher than that has been quickly slipping away from the Nittany Lions. The latest iteration of that is four-star defensive end Tomarrion Parker decommitted from the Nittany Lions Tuesday afternoon. Recruiting reporter Greg Pickel is with me here to break down that breaking news. Greg, what can you tell us about the situation and how TJ came to this decision?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you follow his social media, certainly he's shown a little bit of love toward Georgia lately, T-Frank, but I don't know if there were a ton of tea leaves out there indicating this was going to happen, because let's not forget, he visited Penn State for the last bash. Oh, what? I don't know, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Well, 2 weeks ago, I think it is at this point. So everything seemed to be in a good place for him to continue to be a member of this class, but he tells On3's Chad Simmons that he maybe felt like he committed too soon and he wanted to check out some other schools. Keep in mind, T-Frank, that he did have some official visits planned for the fall to some Florida area schools and some SEC schools prior to picking Penn State. So it almost feels to me like he got the chance to maybe decompress a little bit after the June, July travel period, recruiting period, whatever, what have you, ended. And, decided that his commitment, even though it's like a month old, or was a month old, or was about that at this point, was one that he wanted to open back up. So, Chad wrote at on3.com that Penn State's not out of the mix yet, but I'm hard-pressed to see them getting back into the mix here. Obviously, Tomarrion Parker is from the South and had a lot of Southern schools interested in him. And, that leads to today's decision, another situation where Penn State does a lot of early legwork to get a player from outside the region committed to it, only to see that player decommit prior to signing day.
And it's a situation we've talked about before. The number of players that decommit and then recommit to the program, you can count them on one hand, and one of them is in this class already in Mega Barnwell. So the likelihood, as you mentioned, is pretty low. So in this situation, do we have a clear picture? It's still very fresh. Penn State is in search of offensive linemen, receivers. Now they've got to dip back into the defensive end portal, excuse me, not the portal. That is an actual thing. Into the defensive end group that's available right now. So who are the names that Penn State fans should know? Where does Penn State rebound from here?
Yeah, I mean, the problematic thing, T-Frank, is I don't know if there is at this moment in time. We've talked about whether or not maybe they push back in with Dylan Gooden, and he's a four-star player who is from the Mid-Atlantic. Who is he a linebacker? Is he a defensive end at the next level? I think some schools have different opinions about that, so maybe Penn State ups its interest there. Obviously, we've talked before about Jalen Thompson, the four-star out of Michigan, who actually has set a commitment date here in the month of August. So considering he didn't visit Penn State prior to the end of July, and the fact that he couldn't come to campus before committing, I just don't see how Penn State ends up landing him. So, yeah, the issue here at these positions of need that we talk about, defensive line, receiver, offensive line, is that the board is not overwhelmingly favorable for Penn State in the morning. In fact, it's not favorable at all, because a lot of the guys who they pursued early in the class are committed elsewhere. And I mean, at this point, I hate to be so blunt about it, but it feels to me that to fill some of these spots, you're just going to have to wait and be patient for flip opportunities down the road. Maybe that's because of coaching staff turnover. Maybe that's because of whatever reasons led Tomarrion Parker to decommit from Penn State. Maybe you find somebody who wants to commit to you for those same reasons, whether it's the opportunity to get on the field or whether it's NIL opportunities, so on and so forth. So, ultimately, I think the other thing we should touch on here, T-Frank, because I know many people at home are thinking about it, is this idea that, oh, well, another Southern guy decommits. Why do we continue? Penn State fans will say, why does Penn State continue to recruit the South? Tomarrion Parker, of course, from Phoenix City, Alabama, which is the same town and same high school that produced Christian Campbell to Penn State. So, I mean, you're not going to stop recruiting the South. So if you think the suggestion is just to focus only on the Mid-Atlantic and only on the DMV and Pennsylvania and the Northeast, it's not going to work. So, I get the frustration and I get that fans feel like there's a trend there, but ultimately you got to go to where the talent is, and there's more talent in the South. We all know that. So it's not going to change the way Penn State approaches its recruiting process, but certainly, I mean, This is just, as you said, to kick things off here, another instance of you have a highly rated player committed to you and you feel like things are in good shape. And then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from under you. And there's just not always a lot of good options that you can fall back on. We're seeing that at quarterback. Obviously, Penn State is pursuing Jackson Smolik, but it took them a while to figure out who they were going to target next when Marcus Stokes decommitted. I think we're in a similar situation here where unless you can get Jalen Thompson to hold off on committing and get him to campus and maybe win him back over, I think you're just starting over. And now you're out of camp season. So you don't even have an opportunity to come get guys on campus and evaluate them if they were maybe bubble players for you before or ones you were close to maybe offering but wanted to see either test or just get an accurate height and weight or so on and so forth. So, some of that stuff's going to have to wait until the coaches can hit the road during the season. But yeah, ultimately it's another setback. It's not been a tremendously positive month for Penn State, and we're only 9 days into it. And, I don't know how much more positive news there's going to be this month. I think, I'll just finish with this, T-Frank. I think if you're a Penn State fan, you're hoping for just kind of a quiet murmur of no bad news, and you can live with that even if there's no good news.
So how there's been 3 decommitments so far when you consider Yazeed, Haynes, Marcus Stokes, quarterback and receiver, decommitting, flipping to other schools. Now TJ Parker decommitting and opening up his recruitment. How big of a blow is losing TJ Parker specifically at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, again, when you look at what it takes to win at the highest levels and the ones at Georgia or Alabama or the other schools that are competing at, that Penn State's competing with on the recruiting trail, to match them on the field, you need these high caliber pass rushers and you need high level offensive linemen and you need, obviously, game changing receivers. So it hurts big time. I mean, I think you could make the argument that if you were ranking the commitments in terms of importance to both this class and the future, I mean, he's probably number 3 or would have been number 3 behind the 2 offensive linemen, Alex Birchmeyer and Jevin Williams. So, I mean, it's a significant loss, and it's not one there's not a whole bunch of top 120 guys out there waiting to flip to you or commit to you at this point. So the question just becomes, what kind of player do you replace him with? And, again, you're at a point of the year now where this recruiting cycle is, still 5 months from early signing day, but in a lot of ways, and for a lot of players, the recruiting cycle is over. Now, again, we're going to get some flips, and the what Penn State was able to do to get Vega Ione last February was impressive, but you can't count on that being the case every cycle, and you better be winning if you think you're going to flip guys late, unless there's all kinds of chaos when it comes to coaching changes. So it's a tough pill for Penn State to swallow. I can't imagine a life of a college coach, T-Frank, and knowing the work and effort and sacrifice you put in to get this commitment and then just up and lose it. I just can't imagine the stress of recruiting, but that's what these guys are paid to do, and they're paid to find a way to bounce back and fill this class out with players who can come in and compete right away and make an impact on Penn State. And we know that James Franklin and his assistants are going to do that, but you just can't overcome losing a top 120 player in the on-3 consensus, especially one that play at the position like defensive end, where it's hard to find high-end guys to begin with.
Yeah, so Penn State loses Tomarrion Parker, top 150 player in the nation at defensive end, and a player that I had called a high floor player. And I think that's a bit of a hit here as well in terms of what you have at defensive line. If you look at it overall now, Tyreek Blanding is a guy that has a high upside, very athletic, but needs to grow into his body. Typical of a Penn State defensive tackle. You can say the same exact thing about Mega Barnwell and his potential and his ability. He's got a long way to go in terms of his growth and development. And then you got Jameel Lyons, who is physically dominant, but still is learning to play the position. So if he can turn that corner as a senior, that mitigates some of this. But none of those players are in a position where they're going to be contributing, especially at that edge defender position, to continue to keep guys coming in the cycle, refresh the talent, to get a 4th or a 5th rusher, and to get them contributing early, to get that pass rushing cycle. This is a big hit that Penn State is losing a guy that presumably could get on the field sooner rather than later. And of course, they missed out at the defensive tackle with a player like that as well. So when it comes to this particular decision, wouldn't say it's out of the blue. What do you think the factors are? Do you believe that NIL could be a factor here as well? As we get into the late stages of 2023, you got to ask that question every single time. Is there something out there that brewing we're going to find out later, do you think?
You can't rule it out. I mean, I think that's the simplest explanation at this point. You're never going to be able to prove, in most cases, that NIL opportunities somewhere else played a role in a decommitment or a commitment. But I think we all, you'd be naive to suggest that that's not a part of the reason this happens sometimes, whether it's a commitment or whether it's a decommitment, whether it's at Penn State or somewhere else. And so that's the biggest challenge all these schools are dealing with right now is that NIL, it was said that it wasn't going to have anything to do with recruiting, but as James Franklin sort of pounded the table and said at Big Ten Media Days a couple weeks ago in Indianapolis, T-Frank, of course it was always going to be a part of the recruiting process. And I'm not sitting here and saying Tomarrion Parker decommitted from Penn State in early August because of NIL opportunities elsewhere, but I think we'd be naive to suggest that it may certainly been a part of it. And again, obviously, then you have the distance factor and everything else. So, and winning too. Winning plays a big role. You can call it whatever you want, but if a school like Georgia starts to show interest in you and you live in Alabama, most guys are going to jump at the opportunity to play for Georgia, a team that's shown it can compete for the college football playoff and win consistently. Penn State's won the James Franklin era, but as we all know, 11-11 in the last 2 seasons, and there's just a lot of work to be done to get to the point where Penn State is consistently competing in a way that some of the schools we're talking about are. The way you do it is to get players like this, so when you lose them, it hurts even more.
Yep. I know you are not a mind reader, especially of 17 and 18-year-old young men, but is there a player or a situation you'd be looking at? Now, Penn State fans are on high alert now. Anybody else, not to cast aspersions on anybody, I'm going to qualify the hell out of this question, Greg. Are there any other surprises out there, do you think?
I mean, I think, again, we've talked about some of these and you and Ryan more extensively, but, you look at Dakari Nelson. He did go to Ole Miss at the end of July, so he's still committed to Penn State, 4-star defensive back, really good player, but we're going to have to keep an eye on that. And we know that Conrad Hussey has had interest from Florida and some other schools that are closer to him in the Sunshine State, so we'll watch him and teammate King Mack as well. And, again, I just think we have to see what happens here in the season. Do these guys pop up for official visits elsewhere? Do they make it to the season as a Penn State commit? Right now, I would say yes, but as we learned today, T-Frank, things happen fast, and when players want to open up their recruitment to take advantage of the other opportunities that might be out there, they typically don't waste time making themselves available to do just that.
So last question, loaded question. I'm not going to let you off with an easy question like, is there another decommitment? Come on, we've got to get down to the nitty gritty. You've got Marcus Stokes decommitting, Yazeed Haynes decommitting, TJ Parker decommitting, Evan Link after a really strong run to lose those players and then to lose Evan Link to Michigan in that recruiting battle. Is the sky falling? Because it feels for Penn State fans like the sky is falling for the class of 2023.
Well, I mean, this was a group that I think most people thought would definitely be a top 10, if not top 5 class. And without some major big wins down the stretch here, either before the start of the season or by signing day, it's hard to see how that's going to be the case. As we sit here and talk right now, Penn State still has the number 10 class in the on-3 team consensus rankings by like 0.3 or 0.03 of a percentage point over USC. So it's not going to be long, I don't think, until they fall out of the top 10. And then the question just becomes, how do you get back in it with the board being the way it is right now and the options that are out there not being as highly rated as the guys you lost? So it's doable. It's possible. And look, I know that it's a time of year when everybody wants to be hopeful and the new season's about to be here and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, certainly things have not, July was good at an 8 commitment month for, well, I guess 7 now if you get discount Tomarrion Parker's commitment. But yeah, I mean, it was a good month for Penn State, but there's no question that things have not completely gone according to plan in a lot of different ways. And this is just the latest example of that. So is this guy falling? It might be a little bit, but again, we've seen James Franklin in this group rally plenty of times to close in a way that maybe even the most optimistic Penn State fans didn't see coming. So I would just say sit tight. Let's see what happens here and ultimately know that there's a lot of work to do between both the high school ranks and the transfer portal to make this class the best it can be between now and February.
Greg Pickel, Blue White Illustrated recruiting reporter. Thanks for coming on the show. That'll do it for our breaking news segment. Make sure you subscribe to Blue White Illustrated on YouTube so you don't miss any news from the recruiting trail or Penn State football